John Henry. There's notes on the story, but I'm going to skip them. The night John Henry was born, the sky was as black as coal. Thunder rolled through the heavens and the earth trembled. "This boy is special," the preacher said, as folks gathered in the cabin by the river to see the new baby. In the dim lantern light, John Henry was the most powerful-looking baby folks had ever seen. His arms were as thick as stovepipes. He had great broad shoulders and strong muscles. And as folks stared at him, he opened his eyes and smiled a smile that lit up the southern night. When John Henry raised his arm, folks gasped and brought their hands to their faces, for they saw that the mighty baby had been born with a hammer in his hand. Then they all began to laugh and felt happier than they had in a long, long time. John Henry grew up fast in a world that didn't let children stay children for long. Before he was 6, he was carrying stones for the railroad gangs that were building tracks through the land of West Virginia. By the time he was 10, he was hammering steel from dawn till dark. No train whistle in America sang as loud as John Henry's mighty hammer. It rang like silver and shone like gold. It flashed up through the air, making a wide arc more than 19 feet, then crashed down, driving a steel spike 6 inches into solid rock. By the time he was a young man, John Henry was the best steel driver in the whole country. He could hammer for hours without missing a beat, so fast that the hammer moved like lightning. He had to keep a pail of water nearby to cool it down, and he wore out 2 handles a day. All the railroad bosses wanted John Henry to work for them. When the Chesapeake and Ohio started making a tunnel in the Allegheny Mountains, they asked him to lead their force of steel-driving men. Soon John Henry was whistling and singing in the early summer light as he walked to work in the mountain tunnel. Beside him was his wife, Lucy, with eyes as bright as stars and hair as wavy as the sea. Lucy was a steel driver herself. At noontime, she drove the spikes while John Henry sat with their little boy, Johnny, in the sunny mountain grass and ate his lunch of ham hocks and biscuits with molasses. Lifting Johnny high into the air, John Henry shouted, "Someday you're gonna be a steel-driving man like your daddy." July of that summer was the hottest month on record in West Virginia. Working in the terrible heat, many of the steel drivers collapsed by noon. But John Henry tried to protect their jobs by picking up their hammers and doing their work too. One week he did his own work and the work of 4 others as well. He hammered day and night, barely stopping for meals. When the men tried to thank John Henry, he just smiled and said, "A man ain't nothing but a man. He's just got to do his best." August was hotter than July. One day, as the men labored in the white light of the afternoon sun, a city salesman drove up to the worksite. "Come see, everybody," he shouted. "Looky here at this incredible invention, a steam drill that can drill holes faster than a dozen men working together." "I don't know about that," said the railroad boss, rubbing his grizzly jaw. "I got the best steel driver in the country. His name is John Henry, and he can beat 24 men working together." "Pfft, that's impossible," the salesman said. "But if you can prove your hand driller is faster than my steam driller, I'll give you this machine for free." The boss called to John Henry. "This fellow doubts which of you can drill faster. How about a big contest?" As John Henry stared at the steam drill, he saw a picture of the future. He saw machines taking over the jobs of the country's finest workers. He saw himself and his friends out of work and begging beside the road. He saw men robbed of their dignity and robbed of their families. "I'd rather die with my hammer in my hand than let this steam drill run me down," he yelled back. And his boss and friends all cheered. "That contest will be the death of you, John Henry," Lucy said later. "You got a wife and child, and if anything happens to you, we won't ever smile again." John Henry just lifted Johnny into the air and said, "Honey, a man ain't nothing but a man, but a man's always got to do his best. And tomorrow, I'm going to take my hammer and drive that steel faster than any machine." Lucy put on her best blue dress, and folks came from all over Ohio, Virginia, and Kentucky. They came from the countryside, and they came from the cities. At 6:30 in the morning, John Henry and the salesman with the steam-powered drill stood side by side. Early as it was, the sun was burning hot. There was no breeze. Sweat poured down people's faces like water down a hill. As the onlookers gathered around the contestants, Little Bill, the worker who loved John Henry the best, said, "There ain't a steam drill anywheres that can beat that man." But the city folks who'd staked their hopes on the future of machines said, "He won't beat that drill unless the rocks in the mountain turn to gold." "No, siree," said Jimmy, John Henry's oldest friend. "Before that drill wins, he'll make the mountain fall." Bang! The race was on. As the steam drill salesman turned on the steam, John Henry kissed the smooth handle of his hammer. At first, the steam drill drove the steel twice as fast as John Henry did. But then he grabbed another hammer and started working with a hammer in each hand. He went faster and faster, striking blow after blow as he tunneled into the mountain. "That's a mighty man," the city man shouted, "but he'll weaken when the hardest rock is found." "Not John Henry. Just listen to that steel ring," Little Bill said. "I believe these mountains are caving in," said the city man. "No, they're not. That's his hammers you hear in the wind," Jimmy cried. Inside the dark tunnel, where the yellow dust and heat were so thick that most men would have smothered, John Henry hammered faster and faster. As clouds of stone dust billowed from the mouth of the tunnel, the crowd shouted and screamed. John Henry's hammers sounded like 10,000 hammers. Lucy, Little Bill, and Jimmy cheered when the steam drill was dragged out of the tunnel. Sputtering and spewing, it had broken down. "Come back now, John Henry," Lucy shouted. But John Henry kept hammering faster than any man had ever hammered before, hammering against all the machines of the future. As his hammer glowed white-hot, he tunneled deeper into the darkness, driving the steel so hard that the mighty ribs of his body began to crack, and his insides broke in two, and his great heart burst. When John Henry fell, it sounded like an earthquake. There was a terrible silence inside the mountain. Lucy stood still as stone, for she knew what had happened. When Jimmy and Little Bill brought him out of the tunnel, John Henry's blood ran red over the ground, but his hands still clutched one of his mighty hammers. "I've beat them," he gasped. "Now I'm dying." "Don't go, John Henry," Lucy begged. "Bring me a cool drink of water, honey," he said. Then he took his last breath. Lucy fell down on her knees and sobbed. "Lord, this was a good man," she said. They carried John Henry down from the mountain. They carried him to the river and buried him in the sand near the cabin where he was born. Folks stood in the rain and flagged the westbound train headed for John Henry's grave, and word spread quickly across the land. John Henry's never coming back. Soon the steam drill and other new machines took over the work of the steel-driving men. Little Bill, Jimmy, and others like them left their families and wandered north and west looking for work. As they walked the hot, dusty roads, they took the only jobs they could find. They picked cotton and dug ditches, but often while they worked, they sang about John Henry. John Henry told his friends, "A man ain't nothing but a man. Before I'll be beat by that big steam drill, I'll die with my hammer in my hand. I'll die with my hammer in my hand."